Hello everyone and welcome to another weathering tutorial by me, Neil Podbury. Today I'm going to be weathering this David Andrews kit built Loco, showing you a few techniques that I undertake whilst producing my weathering jobs, and hopefully it will be of interest to some of you. So the first thing I'm going to do is use the airbrush and lay a base coat down on the chassis of the locomotive. After this, I'll go briefly through a few of the colours that I use in order to create this weathering mix. Right, I'm going to lay some paint down over the chassis of the engine. Quite thinly, as you'll see. Try and get in between the spokes and etc. And as you can see, it's a very basic faint coat as we go. Get the steps in as well because they're under the chassis area. They get filthy dirty. And hopefully you can see that that's toned that all down nicely. As many of you will see, these are basically all Humbrol paints in which predominate when I am using the airbrush. The two colours at the front, Matte 98 and Matte 33, are the ones that I use as the base mix. Thereafter, the other ones that you see behind are additions to and extra mixes of. I'm afraid I've got no idea what ratios I mix these in. It's just totally intuitive for me, so it's really a matter of experimentation for you, I guess, and that's really how I get the results that I do. It's purely through experimentation and experience. As you'll see, some of the underframe on this locomotive is still a touch shiny, which suggests it's still wet, and in actual fact that's a really good thing, and I'm going to re-moisten some of the areas with the airbrush because I think it will give an adherence for the weathering powders, and it's one of the techniques I use quite a lot and really like, actually, because not only does it adhere to the surface, it also gives a level of texture. So I'll just do it around the ash pan now, see how I get on. Hopefully you can see that's just given not only a bit of texture, but that'll also, once dry, harden off and give a permanent grip to the original paint job. Right, I'm going to do a bit more on the chassis now, adding texture and what have you behind the wheels, getting a kind of much more grittier feel to that area, as it would be hopefully how it would look in real life. I predominantly produce these effects through using oil paints, and the main oil paints I use are from Winsor & Newton. They're nothing particularly spectacular, they're just the ordinary range. I use mixing white, raw umber, brown ochre and lamp black, but it doesn't matter if you have similar colours to these, because all that you're trying to do at the end of the day is create a kind of mucky, dirty, oily, greasy look. The other benefit with oil paints is often they do leave a slight sheen, which isn't always brilliant, but for this kind of thing is actually really handy. Right, so I'm going to get on now using an old brush, some of these colours, and start adding some mess between the wheels on this loco. I also don't, I'm afraid, have an obvious palette, as it were, mixing wise. I literally just mix as I go, and the more variety in many ways, the better. So hopefully you can see this as I work in on this sandbox and in amongst the frame and the wheels. Just trying to work into all the little bits and pieces, areas, trying to get it all covered as I go. And also, because these paints stay wet for so long, or do not dry for such long periods, it's also, once again, like using the airbrush and creating an adhesion for the weathering powders, you can do the same with these. So where I want to add perhaps a little bit of suggestion of old oil or some such like that, where I stuffed the paint through the spokes, I can now get the weathering powders to stick behind the wheels to the frame, and hopefully, don't know if you can see that, let's carry on doing that over the chassis. Again, add some texture on the sandboxes. I'll dip in with and then back to the oils. Again, this is a mixture of raw umber, the mixing white and the lamp black, just in any kind of variety that it comes. So just stick, I don't know if this is any more beneficial. Be very careful to try and cover all the areas. There you go. And hopefully, as you'll see, a little bit of texture is forming on the work that I'm doing. If you can see that. Let's just keep going now. Where the springs are, just darken it slightly with some more lamp black. Thicker amount on there, the oil that gets onto the springs. And don't worry about what you get on the spokes, because inevitably there will be muck that gets onto the spokes. But what I do, once I've done this, pushing everything through, is to get a sort of flat brush like this and then work up and down the spokes in the hope of spreading that around a bit, so that it gives a little bit of variety and variation on those as well. And also it just softens the anything that's been caught on the spokes. And you can go from there and then just carry on your work. So get some muck on that. Another thing I also do is use the weathering mix very thinly, again in order to perhaps get the weathering powders to mix. Obviously brake blocks pick up the brake dust. As you can see, I've actually somewhat by mistake actually removed some of the paint on there, but it's not a problem. So I just add some more of the... I'm now going to move on to weathering the roof, the foot plate or running plate and the smoke box area. Predominantly I do this by hand and using a set of water-based paints, and this particular set of water-based paints is from Omen Miniatures. I find them very, very good for adhesion. They're very matte, which is extremely useful for this kind of thing, because actually you can add a bit of sheen to them using the oils on the top, as I said previously, which is also very handy. These are the colours that predominate most of my weathering, as you'll see here, and I'll now show you how I weather a cab roof. On with the cab roof. So the paint I'm going to start with is worn tarmac. I think this is an excellent base for the roof, the running plate, etc. It's a sort of warm grey. I'll just go through, say, showing you how I apply and stippled, etc. to get the kind of slightly textured effect on top of a cab roof. So as you can see, it's fairly basic, just applying it as it comes out of the bottle. But the crucial thing that I like to do is, if you just let this set, and it will set quite quickly, is you'll have brush strokes. So what I do is I get a soft, flattish brush and I just gently stipple over the surface to blend and move the paint around. And it just so happens, totally accidentally, that this particular brush has got a little bit of talcum powder in it, or weathering powder in it from a previous application, and again it's just adding further to the texture and the stippling effect. Now I'm going to show a technique that's perhaps not entirely unusual to me, but it's been used by, I'm sure it's been used by many people before, but as I say, this uses no airbrushing. It's to give that oily, greasy, mucky look to the upper surfaces of the locomotive. So once more, I go back to the chassis mix of the mixing white, the raw umber, the black, the ochre, brown ochre, and again just mix to what I think is a reasonable mucky, dirty colour. And then once it's all mixed up, rather crudely I have to say, I apply this to the locomotive. Depending on the level of finish that you're wanting to get here, my suggestion would be this locomotive is destined to be sort of working, but looked after to some degree, so it can't be too filthy. If it was to be absolutely filthy, I'd actually cover all of that cab side there now. I take a very, very soft rag and then try and work down in the direction of the way that the weather would work. And as you can see, it's still looking a bit of a mess. I use lots and lots of very soft, a lot of them old brushes, and I'll just work into the areas that the cloth can't get to, and I'll just, as you can see, work that down around, and you can see that the original black is just starting to show through. Now I appreciate this might be too much for some people, this might be too much of a mucky wash, and that's absolutely fine, but we're going to work on it more. I'm going to work on this harder and bring more of it back. So my next port of call, I don't know if you can see this, is to work on with cotton buds. And what's nice is this engine actually has quite a semi-matte finish. I'm not sure who painted it, and it's as you can see, hopefully you can see that black, the original colour, is just starting to peer through the muck, which is what I want. I want to fade this original coat, and then using another soft, pretty much new brush, I'm going to work again. It's dragging it down in the direction that the weather would work, like this. As I said before, there's another benefit to this process. We're using oils. This will stay damp or wet for quite some time yet. And as a result of that, I can go into one of my weathering powders do a bit of a mix, and actually now add some into where the fireman throws the fire out, or the staff throw the fire out. Not very visible yet, let's just keep working it. As you can see as well, it's always less is more. And many of these lessons have been learnt from watching and listening and reading others that are expert in weathering, such as the military modelers and of course Martin Welch, among a few others. Hopefully you can just see this, and what's great is that will actually now adhere, that will be stuck to that paintwork, which hopefully is what you're after. Just buff the handrails up a bit, clean those back because they obviously get handled a lot. And hopefully, and you'll also see I took the opportunity not only to do the cab roof, but to do the underframe and the footplate. Again, it all looks quite crude at this stage, but that's just the base coat for the layers that are going to go over the top. Obviously haven't done a splash of tops, any of the motion or any of that kind of stuff, but hopefully that gives you a little idea of what you can do with the put it on and take it off technique. Thank you everyone for watching this video. I hope some of the techniques that I've gone into have been useful, and maybe you've learnt one or two things that you can take away and use on your own models. One thing I would say that I said in the last video, but I can't really stress it enough, is to use references, photographic references when you're weathering, black and white or ideally colour. It's absolutely essential for everything I do, and whilst I haven't had one directly to hand doing this short video, I will work into this job far more than here, using references to put the final touches and everything that makes it a unique and bespoke weathering job. Anyway, see you next time.